Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, it is good afternoon. It is the 6th of April, 2020, and we're going to carry on talking about the concept of employee motivation. Just to recap very quickly, we've covered a good amount of information on this NMP program. We spent a lot of time on the thinking skills. We then moved on to the whole issue of managing and leading people. We used the case study of Aztec, and we talked about that in terms of thinking skills. We've also used that in terms of managing and leading people. We've looked at what are the different ways and leadership styles that you may use in managing Aztec, from the directive to the participative to the laissez-faire. We've talked about the difference between management and leadership. We've talked about leadership pipeline and the fact that as you go up the ladder and the layers of the pipeline, so you need to develop different skills because you've got to make different transitions. We said in order to make those transitions, you have to be able to guide and direct and delegate and motivate. And we've talked about guiding, directing, and now we're talking about motivation. In previous sessions, we've talked about Herzberg, we've talked about Maslow, we've talked about McClelland. And those three we have covered. Herzberg very quickly was hygiene versus motivational factors. Maslow was very much about hierarchy of needs. And McClelland was saying that some people have a need for power, some people have a need for achievement, and some people have a need for affiliation. And depending on what their dominant need is, they are motivated by different things. So we move from there. The next model I want to have a look at is the one here called intrinsic motivation. In your notes, you will find a good deal of information on that. And I think in the notes I've called it self-motivation, same concept. But what it really says is that motivation comes from within. In other words, they say you cannot, as a manager, motivate any of your people because motivation comes from within. If you're managing staff, it's only they who can motivate themselves. But to understand this, we need to again go into the semantics, similar to what we had to do with Herzberg. Remember with Herzberg, he said money is not a motivator, but it is a mover. And therefore we needed to understand what did he mean by the concept of motivation. And to him, motivation was creating an inner desire, a passion. He said that money cannot do that, but you can move people with money. And therefore we need to understand the same concept in terms of this definition of intrinsic motivation. Excuse me, it is saying that if motivation is movement, in other words, if motivation is the ability to get someone off their backside to go and do something, I suppose similar to Herzberg in some way, they're saying that you can move people. Right? In other words, if the carrot is sweet enough or the stick is big enough, I can get people to do what I want them to do. But according to intrinsic motivation, that is not true motivation. That is just movement. That is a threat or a promise of something. And they're saying that's not motivation. What they're saying is motivation, and how they define motivation is that it is that inner passion, that inner desire to do something. A real desire and passion to do something. And if that is how you define motivation, well then I think there's a lot of truth to what they're saying, that motivation cannot come from anyone else other than from the individual. No one can make me passionate about what I do, only I can make myself passionate. So it's an interesting model and theory because I think there's a lot of merit to it. Is saying that you as a manager of people cannot motivate your people. But what is very important, it is not negating your responsibility. It doesn't mean you can sit back and say, oh, well, there's nothing I can do. It's got nothing to do with me. It's got a huge amount to do with you. But it is saying you cannot motivate your people, but therefore what can you do? What you can do is create an environment conducive to motivation. In other words, I may not be able to motivate my people, but I can create an environment where it is easy for them to be self-motivated, an environment where they want to, an environment where they're enthusiastic. So I like the model. I cannot motivate my people, but I do need to ask myself, what am I doing to create an environment that makes it easier for my people to be passionate and enthusiastic about what they do? We will look at a model later in perhaps another section which actually talks about the environment that we need to create to have that environment that is appropriate and conducive for intrinsic motivation. So there's a lot in your notes that you can read. In simple terms, you cannot motivate your people, but you can create the right environment, and basically that's what you need to do. And let's understand that environment in basic terms. We've all, I think, in this class worked long and hard enough for different people in different situations. And I would imagine in our careers we've all had different experiences, the positive ones and the negative ones. And quite often those negative ones are those experiences where the job is not great and you're not that happy and you don't enjoy going to work, and you pray for Friday and you give thanks on Thursday, and basically you're grateful when the week is over. If you take a look at those kind of environments, and hopefully there weren't too many of those, if you have a look at those kind of environments, and then you look at other times where you went to work and it was cool and it was nice, and you came home and you were energized and you were excited about what you had achieved and what you had done, what was the difference? And there's quite often many differences, the nature of the work, the feedback, but quite often a commonality between the positive and the negative, or something that is common between all of the positives and all of the negatives, quite often is the line manager that the person worked for. And in that negative, difficult time, quite often there was the line manager that couldn't care less, that wasn't interested, that never gave any feedback, that saw the employee merely as a number just to get something done, wasn't interested in their opinions. In other words, that individual did not create an environment where the person felt valued, where the first person felt they could contribute, and that is what they mean by creating the right environment. Look at the environment which was positive, where the person goes home and they're energized and they're excited and they're passionate about what they're doing. And what do we see in that environment? Is quite often the work may have been more interesting, but quite often, again, it comes back to the line manager. And what did this line manager do that the other one didn't do? Perhaps was more interested in the person, wanted views and opinions, saw the individual as having ideas and suggestions, included the person, recognized the person, involved the person, gave the person the tools that he or she needed to perform, unblocked obstacles that stopped them from being able to deliver. What did that individual, the second manager, do? According to this theory, you would say he did not motivate, but he made it a lot easier to be self-motivated. Okay, so again, he's not motivating the person, but he's creating an environment conducive to motivation. Again, as I've said, plenty to read under self-motivation in your notes. The next model that is on the list there is empowerment, but I'm going to skip that one because empowerment is a concept, it is an action, it is a thing that you need to do as a manager regardless of motivation. We're going to argue later that it is motivating to be empowered, and that is true, but we need to empower people, not just to motivate them. It's something that we need to do as managers, particularly in the South African context. So we'll come back to that as a standalone dimension. We go on to the next one, which is goal setting. And goal setting, again, there's a lot in your notes. And goal setting is simple and complex, but in simple terms, it basically says the following. If you've got nothing to aim for, you aim for nothing. If you've got nothing to aim for, you aim for nothing. In other words, everyone needs goals, everyone needs targets, everyone needs objectives. And if I know what I need to do, and I know what my target is, and I know what the objective is, and I know what the goal is, well, then at least I know what I have to go and do, compared to I just go to work and do stuff. I don't know how many, I don't know how often, I don't know how quick, but I just do stuff. Simple terms, simple terms, if you've got nothing to aim for, you aim for nothing. It becomes more complex than that, but that's a simplistic element of it. So what is it saying? It is saying that everybody, even the most basic level, needs to understand what they have to do. Let me give you a practical example. Let's take a look at somebody, let's say, who is a cleaner, a floor sweeper at the business school, right? And one would say, well, that's a very junior job, and probably it is. But that person needs to know what he or she needs to do. They need to have goals, targets, and objectives. They need to know that they have to clean the floor, but they need to know they have to clean the floor 3 times a day, once at 7 in the morning before the classes get there, at midday just before the lunch break, and at 4 o'clock, let's say, before the evening classes come in. And they need to do it 3 times a day. At those times, they need to do it up to the standard. They need to have a clear objective and target in terms of what a clean environment looks like and a tidy environment. So they need to have that. However, as much as they need to have the detailed goal, target, objective, they need to see the bigger picture. So not only must my floor sweeper cleaner understand 3 times a day, blah, 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 but he needs to, or she needs to, understand the bigger picture. And if he or she understands, and I explain to them that their job in some ways is more important than the dean of the business school, then that starts making some sense to them and becomes interesting to them. And let's expand that concept, because clearly the dean or the head of school is one of the most important people in the business school. But if I can explain to my cleaner that one of the core objectives and goals of the business school is a positive student experience, where my students come to the business school and experience a good and healthy, positive environment, and he or she then understands that they are contributing directly to student experience, and they understand that in some ways their job is having a bigger impact on student experience than the dean, well, then they start realizing how important they are. And let's have a look at that. The chances that most of my students would meet the dean are slim. All right, the dean is a busy guy and he's doing a whole lot of other stuff. So very few of my students will meet the dean, but every single one of my students will experience the work of my cleaner. And if he understands he is having a bigger impact on student experience than the dean, then he understands why he needs to clean that floor at 7, 12, and 4, and why it's got to be done effectively, and how he is valued and valuable to the institution that he works for. If you've got nothing to aim for, you aim for nothing. Make sure that all of your staff know what they need to do, when they need to do it, how they need to do it, and what are the standards, but let them also understand why their role, their job, their tasks are important to the organization. Let them understand the value that they add and where they fall into and fit into the value chain of that organization. So that's goal setting. Right, we then go on to the last one on my list here, and that is Vroom's valence expectancy theory. And in terms of his Vroom's valence expectancy theory, you will again find a good amount in your notes. And I'm going to put it into a nice simple term, although it is more complex than this. But in simple terms, Vroom says there's a couple of key concepts when we come to understanding human beings. The first one is a human being does not want to feel ripped off. Right, do not rip me off. And that relates to effort and outcome. In other words, what he's saying is human beings believe that if I put in effort into something, there has to be an outcome. All right, a reward, and it's not necessarily about a material reward. It could be praise, recognition, or whatever. But effort needs to lead to outcome. Work hard, must be getting something out. If I put in a lot of effort, there's got to be a lot of recognition or a lot of outcome. Effort must lead to outcome, firstly. Secondly, as I've already said, people do not want to be ripped off. People want to know that if I put in effort, there's outcome. If I put in a huge amount of effort and there's very little outcome, well, then I feel that I am being ripped off. I'm being taken advantage of. So effort must lead to outcome. I do not want to be ripped off. And then you would also say, or could imagine, if you understand Vroom, that human beings have a calculator in their head and they know, they can work out when they are being ripped off. Effort needs to lead to outcome. Do not rip me off, and I know when you're ripping me off. I can do the calculation. And that's basically what it is. There's another element that I'm going to add later. But basically, what is it saying? I need to make sure that when I'm managing people, that there is outcome for their effort. And that's not about money. It's about recognition and praise and whatever it may be. Let's put it into practical terms. Let's imagine I work for a boss. Let's imagine he comes to me one day and he says, I want to report on A, B, and C. And I'm a conscientious, diligent person. I take my responsibilities very seriously. And therefore, I put a lot of effort into the report on A, B, and C. I research it, I analyze it, I interrogate it, right? And I put in a lot of effort. And basically, when I finish the report, in my view, it's a great report, and it probably is a great report because of the effort I put in. And if you had to say to me, Carl, how much effort did you put in? I would say I must have put in 10 times effort. 10 times effort if I have to do a calculation. I take the report, I give it to the boss, he says, yeah, that's fine, and he puts it into file 13. And I'm saying, what? I put in 10 times effort. He hardly even recognized it. He certainly didn't even read it properly. And if you ask me to do a calculation, I would say 10 times effort. And what did I get? I get, yeah, that's fine. In other words, 2 times reward. And 10 times effort, 2 times outcome. That's a rip-off. You're ripping me off. That's not cool, and I am not happy. A week goes by. He comes back to me the following week, and he has the same request. He says, I want to report on A, B, and C. And I think, wow, last week I was ripped off, but I'm a diligent guy, and I think, well, maybe he was just in a bad mood. So what I decide to do is, okay, put in a lot of effort, and again, I research, analyze, interrogate, put in huge effort into this report. And again, if I had to do a calculation, and you said how much effort, I would say 10 times. I take this great report that I've done, I give it to my boss. He says, yeah, that's fine, file 13. And I'm saying, no, wait, that's not cool. Second time in a row, you're ripping me off. I wouldn't say that, but I'm thinking it. I'm thinking 10 times effort, 2 times reward, or 2 times recognition. You hardly even read the thing. You're ripping me off, I think to myself. And that's not cool. A week goes by, he comes back to me the third week in a row and he says, I want to report on A, B, and C. What am I going to do? I have to do the report. What am I going to do? The chances are I'm going to reduce the effort because, hey, he's hardly even going to read it. So what will happen probably is take last week's report, cut and paste, slap it together, 4 times effort, because I did do something, right? 4 times effort. Why? Because what is going to happen? I'm going to get 2